After the title defense, the main event of Mark's third year in college, the lives of the students returned to normal. Of course, it was only the case if the stress the students had because of their thesis was not mentioned. Their thesis, after all, was the most important requirement for these students to graduate. And to say, it would not be an easy task. It was already fortunate that Mark managed to chase away that guest panel. If not, things might have gotten worse. The best thing, however, since Mark's thesis proposal was approved, everyone in the group was interested in working on it. After all, the three proposals that Mark's group had were things the group discussed and agreed on before passing the documents. It was also a bad thing for Mark, however. Mark's family did not have a computer at home. In fact, everything that Mark had to do in school was all made inside internet cafes. Worst, Mark had to use his own allowance, neglecting his lunch and only consuming water for the most part. Every single day, Mark was only eating twice a day, with his breakfast being nothing but a cup of instant coffee and a few pieces of Pandasol, which was the only food intake he had for the day until dinner. In a sense, it was amazing that Mark could go on with that kind of lifestyle. Now that they had their thesis, Mark had to spend more time in front of a computer. However, there was no way to do that without spending too much money. And among Mark's group, the only one with the computer that could run the game engine properly was Karen. And she was also the person with the furthest house out of the four. Mark had no money to support commuting to Karen's house. Although the four of them gathered money, that money was all going towards the thesis and would probably still be short of how much they needed in the end. As such, during weekends and their free days, Mark would walk several kilometers towards Karen's house, to and fro. No matter who was asked, they would definitely say that Mark's lifestyle was worrying. Unfortunately, it seemed his family did not even know a tiny bit of his circumstances. Mark sure was doing better, however, he did not change that much. He was still someone that would rather stay away from people, including his family. The only thing that the others could see was how Mark sure was happy doing this thesis. Unlike the others, who were struggling, Mark's group was still smooth sailing in comparison. It was because they were working on something they liked, and not just some last-minute, final resort thesis. Time passed further. Mark entered his fourth year as a college student. Unfortunately, the four-man group they had for their thesis was reduced to three. Saime, their close friend and fourth member, dropped out of school. She hooked up with a man and got pregnant. Because of the circumstances, Saime's parents decided to stop supporting her studies. Even so, Mark's group would still hang out at Saime's house. It was just a couple of blocks away from school, after all. Aside from the three, their circle actually had gotten bigger. Gathering the participants of the cosplay event during the acquaintance party, a group in school was created. It was amazing that it was a circle of the most popular people in the school, even though it was actually nothing but a gathering of like-minded people. It was actually proposed to become an actual club in the school. Unfortunately, the management would be left to the younger members since Mark's group of three, the oldest of the group, had their thesis and graduation to worry about. At the end of the first semester of the fourth year, the game Mark worked on reached a releasable degree. It was not a full game. After all, there was no way they would be able to do as such in just a few months. Instead, Mark divided the entire story he had in mind into several episodes, with the thesis scoping the first and second episodes of the game. As a first step, Mark uploaded a short trailer on social media. Of course, they did not expect much from it. A month after the trailer was posted, Mark released the game on a certain platform for free. The game did not garner much attention after being released. It was not a surprising thing. It was a game released without much publicity, not to mention it was made by students. Still, Mark's life as a student continued. They also had to work on the documentation and other parts of the thesis. It was already good that the downloads reached a few hundred. And since it was stated at the start of the game that it was a thesis project and there would be a survey at the end of the game, many people gladly complied and left a review on the game on the platform. Of course, not everyone was kind enough to do so. Nonetheless, the turnout was quite rather good. The reviewing of gathered surveys and reviews of the game was divided by Mark, Karen, and Markran, and the reviews turned out to be mostly positive. Mark really felt relieved. Who would not be? After all, what if the players did not like it? It was his first game. But then, after 3 weeks of being released, Mark's email became overflowing with reviews. It was to the point that there were a few hundred to more than 1,000 reviews in a single day. And at school, the news came from Karen. A popular internet icon played the game they made and was watched by thousands of people. And the result was the current events. It was to the point that even the instructors of the school learned about it. The thesis of Mark's group was a success. With this, as long as they did the documentation properly and succeeded in the final thesis defense, their graduation was set in stone. Of course, Mark could only shrug when the reviews of the game were mostly asking for the next episode. Darn, as if that would be easy. ******** The end of Mark's college years arrived. A graduation ceremony in a certain expensive resort. Mark graduated with a few special awards. Unfortunately, he was unable to step onto the stage as a cum laude and above. After all, Mark had a rather bad record during his first year and half of the second year. Even so, he had the loudest claps when he received his diploma, even louder than those who received higher honors and awards than his. It was such an honor. Mark graduated. His parents gave him a smartphone as a congratulatory gift. It was just a cheap one compared to what his classmates had. But it was a phone, nonetheless. At this time, Mark's family had already left the private land they were taking care of. The land was finally bought and was up for development. As for his family, they were given 500,000 pesos as an incentive. After all, it was more than a decade since my father received his last salary as the land's caretaker. And because of that, they had some rights over the land. The new owner needed to pay them to leave. With that money, they managed to find a new place to call home. They even managed to afford a computer of their own. That computer became Mark's workstation as he worked on the continuation of the game he started. Mark just graduated, and he already had a distinct path to follow. He also kept a close connection with his friends, especially Elsa and Charmaine, who he treated as his own younger sisters. Perhaps, even more than his actual sister. Rough events happened within the group of Elsa and Charmaine. The two even left the group in the end. Nonetheless, Mark did not leave their side. Years passed. Mark was now well known in the game industry as an indie game developer. He even managed to afford to rent his own office. Elsa and Charmaine became his assistants and even voice actors for the games he made. From time to time, Karen, Markran, and Carlo would visit the three and join the fray. Along the way, Mark also accepted some animation vocational courses after a government-funded vocational school opened nearby. Mark had new friends, and some became contributors to his mini-game studio. From time to time, Mark was receiving emails from foreign game companies. Some were trying to recruit him, while others wanted to hire his studio to develop games. However, Mark declined the offers. He had his own plans for his business. Sometimes, Mark would go to conventions with his friends. There was even one time that Mark was invited to be a guest in a video game convention. It was not surprising. At the current time, his studio was the most successful video game developer in the country among the independent studios. Mark was successful. It was something that no one would be able to deny. The games he directed and developed gained a rather hefty amount of fame internationally. In fact, his success was the word of his alma mater even after several years. He was also invited several times as a seminar speaker for the new students. Mark, who had already overcome his introverted personality, was having a good life. And he was still young. After graduating and being self-employed, there were very few events to take note of Mark's life. Well, there were some weird things, however. Once, he met a little girl, which called him Papa, for no reason. It caused the girl's parents to feel flustered. When Mark managed to save money and tried to buy a car, he could not help but stare at the wife of the owner of the store. it was an awkward encounter. There was also one night when he was walking home. He stared at the sky for no reason, as if he was waiting for something, but nothing happened. A few more years passed. Mark's studio had gotten bigger. He reached the point where he did not have to do anything and leave the things to his employees. And here, Mark started a new but unexpected business. It was creating and selling cosplay props. After all, creating things was one of the things Mark loved the most. Using his savings from his first business, Mark managed to invest in better tools and equipment for the second one. First was the video game industry, next was the otaku industry. Who would have thought that the famous Mark would go and sell handmade props despite his current status? One day, Mark was on his way home after meeting with one of his clients. He was running late and had passed the last ride he was supposed to ride on to get home. He had no choice but to walk home, taking a shortcut. On the way, he passed by a construction site on a road that was pretty much devoid of people. It was when Mark noticed a strange event. A van suspiciously stopped in front of the site. Mark could not help but feel that it was something that he should not see. Things became worse when he saw the men come out of the van. They were all armed with guns and were carrying an unconscious girl. As Mark was not a hero, he tried to avoid a confrontation. Slowly and sneakily, Mark tried to leave, walking around the site. After leaving the area, only would he try to contact the police. Unfortunately, it was too late. A lookout on the construction site saw Mark before he could leave. By the time that Mark knew, sounds of gunshots entered his ears. Pain enveloped his body as he fell on the grass-covered soil. Mark stared at the night sky as his sight grew dimmer than the darkness of the night. It was a good life. Mark muttered with a smile. As Mark closed his eyes, his body began to feel cold. And it was when he uttered the words, "This is the end, right?" The dead Mark spoke, opening his eyes once more to see a black-dressed woman standing beside his dead body. The woman in black dress stared at Mark with exasperation. By what it looked like, she never expected this kind of development. Of course, the woman was no other than the Visayan goddess of the underworld, Mutagen. "Just how absurd of a being could you be?" Mutagen asked Mark, who was lying bloody on the ground. "Death in this world might not be harmful, but the pain should be real." In the first place, Mark was aware all along, even though he was not supposed to. "What is with that expression?" Mark asked. "You put me into this mess without warning. I should be the one giving you a complaint." Mark began recalling what happened before this mess started. Their group arrived in Kahilwayan, or at least, its remains. With Mutagen as their guide, they made their way towards the wooden mansion atop the highest hill. The climb through the uneven stone stairs was tedious. They wanted to fly up instead. However, Mutagen told them to climb as it was the rule. Even if it was abandoned for a long time, it was still an abode of the gods. There were no qualms about climbing the stairs from Mark's group. As the saying went, in Rome, do what the Romans do. Besides, although tiring, there was no harm in following the rules of this place. Although there seemed to be nothing strange about the stairs going up the hill, it was actually the last thing that Mark remembered before being thrown into this confusing mess. "Where are the others?" Mark asked the silent Mutagen. "There is nothing for you to be worried about. All of you went through this trial, and all of them had already exited. It was only you who actually took the time to enjoy this." Mutagen explained with a sigh. That set of stairs up the highest hill was called the Path of Reminiscence. Anyone recognized by the gods of Kahilwayan would be given the chance to climb it and undergo the trial. It was the trial of regrets. This trial was not made to bring harm. However, not being able to pass it would cause the gods to revoke their recognition. Of course, losing the recognition of the gods in the past was a huge deal. Even so, this trial was rarely held as gods did not really pay much attention to mortals. It was unless that mortal had qualities that caught their interest. And now, it was the last time that this trial would be held. For a very long time, no one was around to maintain the place. As such, Even the mechanisms and magic of the trial were nearing their breaking point. This time, Mark's entire group went through the trial. It was more than enough to deplete the trial's remaining functions. Worse, Mark actually used this opportunity to enjoy himself. For sure, this instance would be the last time before the trial was finally broken. "Since when did you wake up?" Magwayan asked Mark. "Around the time of my title defense," Mark said. "What kind of trial is this anyway? Although I woke up, I can't really control myself the way I wanted. It's like I'm in a dream, but it's not just some illusion, either." Mark had already experienced the illusion magic of Takabalangs. He was pretty sure that this felt different than just some illusion. "Of course, it is not an illusion," Magwayan replied proudly. "This trial, the trial of regrets, was created with the help of various godly beings. It reads the person's string of fate and simulates the parallel world where the right decisions were taken. In a sense, it was a world that you could have experienced if you took the most optimal actions in your life. It was a simulation of a parallel world where everything went right in Mark's life. No wonder Mark felt that it was an enjoyable life. As Mark stared at the sky, he could not help but sigh. At this point, Magwayan's exasperated stare turned complicated. This trial. The fewer regrets the person had, the faster it would end. It did not matter whether the person passed or failed. The trial would last depending on the amount of their regrets. Magwayan spoke. "But you. The amount of regrets you have is equal to half of your life. Just how are you living in that condition?" Mark could only shrug. "Many people are like me in this world. I don't know if gods are different, but we mortals experience many things outside our capabilities, both physical and mental. It is only later on that we realize we actually had options, and the only thing left is regret. I understand that. Not only mortals. Us gods are also prone to irredeemable mistakes, but you are regretting your entire existence. That is not something a normal person could live through. In your state, it would not be a surprise if you ended your life long ago." Magwayan replied. "Does it really matter anymore?" Mark grumbled. "That's already the past. I already got over it. My life might indeed have been better if I gave my best and chose the right decisions, but now, I'm already satisfied with what I currently have. I even achieved more than I deserved." Magwayan nodded in agreement. Mark indeed had regrets from his past. However, he was doing better now, even if the entire world was in chaos. "So, aren't we going to end this already?" Mark asked. "This body is already dead." "It is up to you," Magwayan replied. "This is your trial. You must find a way to end it or else, you will fail." "Did anyone in my group fail?" Mark asked. "It is something that you should ask them. Even as a god, I respect the privacy of mortals." Magwayan shook her head. "I guess that's true." Mark smiled. "Then, I guess I understand how to end this." And then, Mark stared back at the sky. "Goodbye, it was fun." And there, the scenery began to distort. Mark was lying down. But suddenly, he found himself standing as he was ejected through some sort of mirage-like portal. "Gurgur." A voice entered Mark's ear as a heavy but warm embrace enveloped his body. "Papa." Following the May, it was the little girls. "Master." Amihan also followed, landing on Mark's head. "Mayor." "You girls." Mark said as he sat down on the ground, embraced by his family. He then saw Spera, Feng Jiruo, Gemetris, and Elia, standing nearby. At this time, Magwayan's avatar appeared out of thin air. "Congratulations. You passed the trial." Magwayan spoke, congratulating Mark. "What's the prize?" Mark suddenly asked, making Magwayan sigh in exasperation. "Why not try to feel your body first before asking?" Magwayan replied. And since the Visayan goddess of the underworld said it, Mark did observe his body. Now, Mark realized something. It seemed that there was an invisible film of energy covering his entire body. Furthermore, it was not only him. May, Amihan, and the little girls were the same. He also felt the same as he panned his eyes to the rest of the group. It was until his eyes fell on the dejected Feng Jiruo. That is the blessing of protection, Magwayan explained. It grants protection to those that pass the trial of regret. It is not something omnipotent. You can still die if the damage done to you exceeds the capacity of the protection. However, as this energy belonged to Kaptan himself, it would give a huge amount of protection against energies that came from his source. Then, this is what you planned when you suggested coming to this place. Mark spoke. It is. Magwayan nodded. Although I said before, you might find something that could help. I believe you understood that a trial had a chance of failure. Rather, the chance of failing is rather high. It is just you and your group are a bunch of monsters. I was expecting an artifact of some sort, Mark honestly mentioned. Artifact? Magwayan shrugged. Do not expect as such. The gods of the past went against the protectors of this world. They would need all the strength they could get. Those artifacts you wanted are all either used up, broken, or lost after the era of gods ended. Mark fell silent. That did not enter his mind. If that was the case, it would not be a surprise if this place had nothing left of value. In any case, it seemed that they got what they needed, although through unexpected means. If they had some resistance against Kaptan's energy, then Mark would not experience getting severely burned in an instant like before. Although Mark could regenerate his wounds, it was still a horrible experience. By the way, how long did my trial take? Mark asked. After all, he did spend several years in that illusory world. It would be hard to tell how much time passed in reality. Gerger, it's already a whole week since we climbed the hill. May explained. If that was the case, then it was no wonder why May and the girls seemed to have missed him. Since they finished the trial before him, they might have been waiting for him for days already. Furthermore, if it was already a week that passed here, the time that passed outside should be way longer. If you are wondering about the time outside, the time here passes at around a third of the speed outside. It should be more than 3 human weeks that passed there already. Magwayan chimed in. Mark frowned. The trial took him almost a month. He should have finished it quickly instead of trying to live it through. And now, you are regretting spending too much time within the trial, Magwayan said, seeing Mark's vague reaction. You really like living in regret, don't you? Mark stared at the Visayan goddess of the underworld. However, he could not refute her. Instead, he noticed something. Isn't your vocabulary getting more and more modern? Mark asked with a straight face. In fact, before they entered Kahilwayan, Magwayan still speak in an old way, using more old and deep words. Now, she was speaking like your modern-day neighbor. It was not hard to notice such a change. I was watching the entire trial and learned about the world you all lived in. I believe there is nothing wrong with adapting to it. In fact, are you not having a hard time when I speak of unintelligible words to the people of this world? Magwayan reasoned, and she quite had a point. Still, I can't believe how interesting to watch the growth of a world without the reliance on magical aspects. Humans even achieved things that magic could not. Isn't that natural? Mark asked. Humans strive to make their lives better. If they had magic, they would rely on it. If not, then find another way. Is it not the case in your world? That question made Magwayan silent. She did not reply and answer Mark's question. Instead, Ilya chimed in. We got what we needed here. What's the next plan? Ilya sure was in a hurry. Well, they did spend quite a long time here. Then, how about letting me rest first? Mark replied. You guys finished your trials quite a while ago, but I just finished it. I'm pretty tired. The feeling of getting shot and dying in a vacant lot is also unpleasantly lingering in my mind. I want to sleep. Mark's words made everyone look at him strangely. You spent a whole lifetime in that trial? Ilya asked. Is your head still okay? Not everyone understood Ilya's question. However, Mark understood her clearly. Mark spent a whole lifetime in the trial. He experienced things that were different from his own reality. While it was a fake world, its effects on mental health were real. It would not be surprising if he incurred mental trauma and disorders from living a false life amidst the real one. However, Mark was fine, and rather, he was doing better than before. Mark's experiences in the trial were learning material for him, and from now on, he would make sure that he would get fewer regrets as possible. Day 227 to 7:21 p.m. Wooden Mansion, Hill of Kaptan, Kahilwayan. It was time to cook, and it would be the first meal after Mark's return. May was happy to cook this time, and she wanted to do it alone. In front of the set of wooden stairs in front of the wooden mansion's front porch, Mark sat in deep thought. While one of the reasons for Mark's current behavior was tiredness, it was more of a hangover from experiencing several years of life he never actually had. "You seem distraught." A woman appeared beside Mark like an apparition. "You passed the trial. Or was it a mistake?" Magwayan was asking as such due to Mark's current state. The trial of regrets was created to mirror the times that the person regrets the most. They had to relive that moment and end up in the better fork of destiny. The person undergoing the trial must notice what was wrong or feel off and incomplete. However, the person undergoing the trial had his memories sealed, making it extremely hard to overcome. Even if the memories were gone, the soul and heart should still recognize what was true and what was not. A person content in life, despite their regrets, would find the world inside the trial easier to see through, and if it was the opposite, their regrets weighted more than their content and redemption, it was easier to fail. It was not wrong to say that the trial of regrets was a trial to weigh a person's heart and soul. If one passed the trial of regrets, it was rather rare to see them in the same state as Mark currently was. After all, this kind of state was more apparent to those who failed it, as they could not get over their regrets and wanted to change those past events in their lives, even if they had to give up their current lives. "You, yourself, confirmed it that I passed," Mark replied without looking at Magwayan. "Besides, I'm not mulling over my life there. I'm just annoyed that even though I'm successful, I still died like a dog. Even though I lived as a failure in this life, I at least managed to retaliate before supposedly dying." Mark finally turned to Magwayan and asked, "That end? That is where my life was destined to end, isn't it?" At that question, Magwayan looked at the wooden gates in front of the mansion. It was the very exit of the trial. "As I said before, the trial of regrets worked by reading a person's string of fate. If it showed you your death at that time, it should be the true time where you meet your end. Destiny could be influenced and changed minorly, but changing it entirely is impossible. Even if you learned about your future in one way or another, trying to change it would not do much. If you learned about others' futures and tried to intervene, your efforts would be futile as your intervention is already taken into the account. That is how destiny works. No one under its supervision can change it." "No one under its supervision," Mark murmured. "Then, it means that anyone not under it could influence it drastically. Pretty much what happened to me and Mayer." "Is that the case for you and your wife?" Magwayan asked. "Then you too must be lucky, as things destiny could not influence just do not fall from the sky." Mark then shrugged. "Actually, what changed our destiny literally fell from the sky." Magwayan could not help but reveal an awkward expression. Well, she knew nothing about what happened there when Mark's destiny changed far from what it should be. The trial of regrets also only showed the supposed possibilities and could not show any variable that fate could not influence. Despite not asking, Magwayan sure was curious as to what caused Mark and May to escape their destinies. From what she saw, both of them should have died in the same incident. Yet, they were still alive and now had the possibility to ascend to godhood. Mark stared forward without elaborating further. Magwayan was just an avatar and Mark could not sense her emotions. But even if he could, there was no way he would just tattle to her about his secrets and cards in hand. "By the way, how are you still here?" Mark asked, changing the topic. "I don't think Silam can provide as much energy to make the artifact last this long." It was something that Mark noticed. One empty, mental crystal could only make the artifact, the Mark of the King, connect to Magwayan for half a day at most. Although Mark was unsure about Silam, there was no way for her to supply as much energy for the artifact to last for a whole week continuously. "Why not feel your surroundings for a bit?" Magwayan replied. Mark did as she told. It was when Mark noticed that the energy in the surrounding area was somehow thinning. Kahilwayan was the abode of the gods of ancient Visayas. Even if it was left empty for thousands of years, it still had the lingering energy of the gods that created it. But now, Mark felt that the energy in the surroundings was considerably lower than the time they entered this place. It was pretty hard to notice unless one really paid attention. Knowing that Mark would ask, Magwayan spoke first and explained. I plan on depleting the energy in this place entirely into the artifact. Mark could not help but turn to Magwayan. He saw her looking at the gates, but her gaze seemed to cover the surroundings as she continued speaking. The Kahilwayan is the abode created by Kaptan. It was his kingdom in the sky where he ruled over the other gods and the people of this territory. Magwayan closed her eyes. But now, it was nothing but an empty place. A place that gathered the memories of the forgotten past. Without anyone to maintain it, the energy in it would deplete completely sooner or later. Isn't it better to make use of this energy instead? Magwayan opened her eyes and looked at Mark. The depletion of the energy in this place might possibly prevent some dangers too. Although Silam is guarding the passage, we cannot be sure whether anyone else would not be able to reach this place. With the current state of your world, it would not be surprising if this place was breached in some way we had no way of knowing. Then, it would be better to deplete the energy before it was used for something unpleasant. Won't depleting the energy in Kahilwayan destroy it? Mark asked. Not necessarily, Magwayan replied. The energy in the surroundings only appeared because gods lived in this place for a long time. As someone who was backed by the eyes, you should know that godly beings exude a strong aura. That is why godly beings could not just live anywhere as they pleased. It is because their presence has a huge effect on their surroundings, as their bodies continuously diffuse energy into the surroundings. Magwayan then retracted her stare at Mark. The energy in the surroundings is a completely different matter compared to the existence of this place. Even without the energy, it would continue to exist. As she continued to explain, Magwayan turned her head on a crystal tree nearby. But unfortunately, all living things in this place that relied on the energy for a very long time could end up dying without it. Mark fell silent in understanding. The things that Magwayan said sure were possible. If some evil beings, worse, the infected, reach this place, it could become a huge problem. If some, infected, managed to sneak into this place, another godly being might get born using the lingering energy of the gods. There was still the issue of the infected, Sonogo. They rather not have another problem to deal with. At this point, one question entered Mark's mind as he turned to Magwayan once more. By the way, why did the gods from your world venture into ours? It was a good question. The gods of the past entered Earth after the lax management of the previous observer. But why? It was a question that could never be answered before. Because we had to. Magwayan replied, deciding not to hide too much information from Mark about the circumstances. In the first place, there was nothing that Mark could do even if he knew. Once you ascend to godhood, your growth will stagnate. Not only in appearance, but even the growth of your power would need to rely on the people that worship you. It was because the world and the universe stops you. If a god wanted to become stronger without the reliance on their worshippers, there was only one way. It is to leave the world we came from and ascend to higher realms. The higher the realm, the higher the limit for a god's growth. When this world became connected with other realms in the past, many gods immediately jumped in for the opportunity. After all, the realm your world is at was much higher than the realm we came from. Magwayan sighed. Unfortunately, during the clash of the gods to divide territories, we ended up on the weaker end. There is no way for us gods of a lower realm to contend against the gods of the higher realms, especially from those arrogant gods from Asgard and Olympus. Furthermore, Magwayan slightly shook her head as she remembered. Our world is facing a crisis. Crisis, you say? Mark was rather surprised. You already knew that I ferried the dead, not to the afterlife but to our realm instead. Our world is run by magic, and the technological level is very low. But that is not the problem. For thousands of years, the human population in our world had been stagnant. Through the cycle of death and rebirth, the souls of people returned to be born as another entity. And as the population increased, new souls were born. The problem lies not on the reincarnated souls but the birth of the new ones. New souls were barely born in their world, causing a shortage and leading to lesser and lesser instances of pregnancy and birth. By what Magwayan explained, Mark understood that the humanity of Magwayan's world was decreasing instead of increasing. Barely any new soul was born, but the count of death was increasing. As people committed more and more sins, their souls would end up getting punished, barring them from rebirth for a long time. It was without a doubt a crisis, especially for gods since there needed worshippers to maintain their strength. And if this trend continued, it would not be surprising if Magwayan's world faced human extinction. And while the other gods were busy using the humans of Earth to increase their power, Magwayan left her duties as the god of the sea and became the god of the underworld instead. It was to bring new souls to her already dying world. Mark fell silent once more. The reason for Magwayan to come to Earth was rather grim. She was definitely shouldering the future of her world. And with the death of the other gods, she was now alone to fulfill her duties. While Mark and Magwayan talked, May began to call him for dinner. By the looks of it, May cooked more than normal, implying the celebration of Mark's return. No one within the group had problems with it. It could also be their last celebration before heading out and confronting the infected Sonogo. Of course, there was one person who did not look even a bit happy. It was Feng Jiruo. It was not like she was against the celebration. Unfortunately, she was the only person within the group to fail the trial. Day 229 to 8:11 a.m. Wooden Mansion, Hill of Kaptan, Kahilwayan. 2 days passed after Mark existed the trial of regrets. In the previous cases, Mark would immediately urge everyone to leave once their goals for the journey were met. Back when they searched for Pafil's wife, after they finished their business in Corregidor, and after making sure that his family was safe, they immediately left afterward. With the current state of the world, there was really no time to dawdle around. As for Mark spending more time in the trial, it was not without benefit. Among their group that passed the trial of regrets, he was the one who absorbed the trial's energy the most due to his prolonged stay inside it. The remaining energy within the trial of regrets was sucked dry, and it all came to Mark. That was why even though Mark used up 3 weeks inside the illusory world, it was still worth it. And, of course, their prolonged stay was the same. Magwayan was keen on absorbing the residual energy in Kahilwayan into the artifact of the Tamawas, the Mark of the King. Doing so would accomplish Magwayan's 2 goals. One was to not let anyone take advantage of the residual energy, and the other was to connect to this world more. As only an avatar, Magwayan would not be able to do much. However, as a god, it was a good way to relieve boredom. Her world was stagnant and had lower technological advancement compared to Earth. Besides, fewer souls existed in her world. Thus, her job as the fairy woman to the underworld did not matter much anymore. She found Earth more interesting compared to hers. Of course, the eyes would not see her actions positively. In the least, she would not interfere with the inhabitants of Earth and just remain watching. After all, what she wanted was nothing but entertainment. On the other side, Mark's group was also busy. Kahilwayan was the abode of ancient Visayan gods under Kaptan's leadership. Of course, everything inside this space was of extreme value. Each tree inside Kahilwayan, even the smallest sapling, were all spirit trees. They might not be pure spirit trees that had intelligence, but spirit trees were rare existences on their own. And for Mark and Elia, these spirit trees were valuable materials to create magical items and weapons. Now that the mortal dimension and the spirit dimension were fused, magical energy was everywhere. Magical items and weapons would be extremely useful in this era, especially when fighting against the infected and the Mechids. Cutting these trees should have been a blasphemy to this place. However, Magwayan allowed and even encouraged them. After Magwayan absorbed all the energy in this place, Everything living inside that relied on magical energy would slowly die off. In fact, Magwayan planned to turn Kahilwayan into a magicless place, making it have less value than outside. This way, there was less chance for this place to be desecrated by those with evil intentions. Aside from the spirit trees, there were also a lot of magical herbs that Elia recognized from the past. While Elia was not that versed in magical medicine and such, she was still a subordinate of a mad scientist in the past. That scientist studied a whole lot of things in order to create beings that could oppose the gods. That was why Elia had the opportunity to learn many things. Among those things were different kinds of magical plants that existed around the world in the Lost Era. Another amazing thing about the place was its structures. One would think that wood, while a good construction material, would not last too long compared to modern construction materials. However, it was different in this case. The buildings in Kahilwayan, like the houses and the mansion, were all made of wood. However, the wood used was as hard as steel, probably even harder if not for the fact that it was several thousand years old. It was no wonder that while looking old and dirty, the huts and the wooden mansion did not really show any sign of crumbling. If Magwayan wanted to actually demolish this whole place, Mark would have taken apart these houses. Unfortunately, it was not her intention, and Mark could only leave the houses intact. In any case, gathering the spirit trees and magical herbs kept Mark and the rest of the group busy. They even managed to find and catch strange-looking animals living in this realm for thousands of years. One example was a deer with blue skin and crystal horns. There was even a butterfly with glowing wings and a bird with rainbow feathers. Unfortunately, there were very few animals despite the place being left alone for thousands of years. Magwayan explained that these animals were not really magical ones in the past. These animals were just normal animals that were either caught or offered by their worshippers. However, being exposed to the energy in Kahilwayan evolved their species after generations. It caused these animals to have a longer lifespan but lower reproductivity. You win some and lose some, as the saying went. It was the same for magical races with very long lifespans. It did not matter whether they were demons, spirits, or elementals with physical bodies. Those that lived longer had a lesser chance of having offspring. Even some races could not actually reproduce and instead were given birth by nature through luck. By Magwayan's estimate, she needed 2 to 3 more days to completely absorb Kahilwayan's energy into the Mark of Kings. They had plenty of time gathering things all around Kahilwayan. Still, Mark could not help but feel unfortunate that there was not a single legendary item left they could bring home. It would be nice if they could. Especially since there were very few items known that the Visayan gods wielded. No, it was not just the Visayan gods. There was barely anything known about the ancient religions of the Philippines after the Spaniards erased most of the records from history. Maybe, there were still some records left hidden somewhere no one knew. Unfortunately, what was known about the ancient records and history mostly came from more modern compilations from historians and archaeologists that did not even come from this country. It was ironic that the people of this country barely knew about its origins while idolizing everything foreign. And those who were interested in the ancient facts of this country were actually foreigners. Behind the wooden mansion, Mark was busy cutting a tree using an axe made from his blood. Surely, this axe was sharp enough to easily fell a regular tree. However, a living, spirit tree, was much tougher than those. Even the dead, spirit tree that Mark got before was way tougher than normal trees, not to mention living ones. While cutting the tree, Mark noticed something fly from the tree from the corner of his eye. It seemed to be a butterfly at first glance, but it made Mark shiver. He kept it at the corner of his eye and did not look at it directly. Clang! And as it flew near him, he dropped his axe, causing a loud sound. Mark did not bother about the axe and jumped on the butterfly as fast as he could. Mark even strengthened his body and his veins could be seen glowing red just to catch the butterfly. Mark felt the butterfly on his hand. That was the only then he looked at it directly. What Mark had on his hand was not a butterfly. It was a small book that could fit into his palms. The noise from the dropped axe caught the attention of everyone nearby. It would be fine if they heard a tree falling, but definitely not a carelessly thrown axe. But what everyone saw was Mark staring at his hand, wide-eyed and excited. Yes, the Mark that barely shows his emotion was clearly excited that even the children noticed it. Magwayan appeared, also drawn in by the commotion, and she immediately noticed what Mark had on his hand. You caught something extremely rare. I didn't expect to see one after thousands of years. Magwayan's words sure surprised everyone. Well, Magwayan was surprised herself as she saw what Mark caught. May and Elia approached Mark with Spera and the rest behind. They were all curious what Mark caught, thinking that it was some sort of animal or insect. Caught? That was what Elia asked, seeing that what Mark had on his hand was a small book. How would someone catch a book in the first place? Did it fall from somewhere? Furthermore, the book was open in Mark's palms, the pages were empty. Do you know what that is for you to be excited? Magwayan asked, seeing Mark's current state as he stared at the book. Not exactly, Mark replied. But I know that it is something that grants paranormal abilities to people. I heard before that there was a witch doctor that gained his healing abilities after catching one of these. Even one of my grandfathers said that they saw one of these before but was unable to catch it since it was hard to notice just by the corner of his eye and he looked at it directly only for it to vanish. Unfortunately, he realized it too late and heard about the myths after he shared seeing a book-shaped butterfly to his drinking friends. Hearing Mark say, book-shaped butterfly, the rest finally realized why Magwayan said caught and not found or picked. A book-shaped butterfly, or rather, a book flying like a butterfly. One cannot look at it directly as it would immediately vanish. It surely was magical. You are not far from it, Magwayan replied, floating and approaching Mark. It is a medium or a catalyst for magical arts, rituals, and ceremonies. It is both a living being and an item born from accumulated magical energy in an area. With that in your hands, your magical and psychic abilities would be enhanced further. The witch doctor you mentioned might have gotten healing abilities since it was already within his knowledge and was just enhanced. After hearing the actual use of it, it became another cause for surprise. But how did it have the shape of a book and look like a butterfly? That question came from Spera, who was fascinated by the book's use. And as Magwayan replied, she shook her head as she herself did not know that exact answer to Spera's question. I also do not know why a book. However, it might be because books are one source of knowledge humans had. There were also similar catalysts that had different shapes, like scrolls or stone tablets, while some were just a piece of paper, folded and shaped like a bird. So, it takes the form of something that provides knowledge, isn't it? Mark asked. That might be the case, Magwayan nodded. You are very lucky to catch that. You better not lose it as it should be far more special than the catalysts you heard about. Mark stared back at the book in his hand and knew Magwayan was right. The book from the story he heard was actually born on Earth where there was barely any magic and it gave the witch doctor healing abilities. What Mark caught was born in Kahilwayan, an abode of the Visayan gods. It should be far more valuable and powerful. Would it fly away again? May asked. It was a reasonable question as it was a flying book before Mark caught it. No, Magwayan smiled and stared at Mark. However, do not get it away from your body as much as possible as the one that caught it. You can lend it but the person burrowing it should not let go of it either. You can put it in your pocket, even your storage ring. You can even make it a necklace. However, never leave it unattended or away from your body without anyone around to pay attention to it. You will definitely regret doing that. Day 237 to 12 p.m., Sacred Gates, Kahilwayan. Mark's group spent time gathering as many items as they could take from Kahilwayan. Even Mark's and May's spatial rings were full to the brim, mostly of logs and branches from the spirit trees they cut down. Even with both the rings full, the group still had bags they carried where the lighter herbs and crystals were stored. And lastly, Shemetris, who was pulling a makeshift cart, carrying a cage with a few animals inside it. They barely spent a week and a few days in Kahilwayan. However, on Earth, it was already exactly a month after they entered the abode of the ancient Visayan gods. And today was the next time the passage between Kahilwayan and the secret realm in Mount Madia as could be opened. Going down from Kahilwayan was not as complicated as going up. The protective barrier of Kahilwayan was only working one way, and they could pass through it from inside. Thus, if one was capable of flight, they could go down from the floating islands, although it required effort due to the actual distance of Kahilwayan to the peak of Mount Madia. Mark's group could do that at any given time. However, they still picked the time when the passage would be opened. After all, the passage would only make them a bit dizzy, and it would take them to the peak of Mount Madia as almost instantly. It was even more preferable, considering they had heavy backpacks and a cage containing the animals. Unfortunately, they could not use Spera's portal to leave Kahilwayan. As Magwayan explained before, there was a protective barrier around Kahilwayan. It disabled entry aside from the designated passage. Teleportation from inside Kahilwayan was possible to exit it, but it would not work trying to enter the place. A portal, however, would not work, no matter what, as a portal connects both inside and outside. It was considered a form of entry even if used to exit Kahilwayan. Even so, using the portal going from place to place within Kahilwayan worked fine. It was unfortunate for Spera, knowing that her abilities were barely of use inside places created with its own rules. The group walked out of the gigantic gates, which immediately closed on their own after they all exited. It still moves on its own. Spera could not help but voice out. After all, Magwayan practically drained the magical energy in the place. Yet, the magical, gigantic gates still worked. At that question, Magwayan answered, "Do not treat these gates as a mere structure but as a living being." That answer sure made the group look back at the gates. They did not expect that it was something alive. "You can open the passage now, right?" Mark asked Magwayan. She nodded before floating in front of everyone and facing the cliff in front of the gates. Magwayan gave the same hymn that they heard from Silam before. It did not take long, and the similar mirage that reflected the scene at the peak of Mount Madia as instead appeared. Without further ado, the group entered the mirage. The mirage, of course, transported them instantly to the peak of Mount Madia. But before they could even make out their surroundings, the smell of something burning assaulted their noses. And instead of a clear noon sky, what they saw was a darkened sky, covered by the rising black smoke. Immediately, everyone ran towards an area that gave them a clear view of the mountain. From there, they saw the blazing fire that had already swallowed the north and eastern side of the mountain. Boom! An explosion of energy ensued above the burning forest midway the mountain. Because of the distance, Mark's group could barely make out the silhouettes of two humanoids flying around the smoke-covered area. This sight made Magwayan clearly disturbed. This mountain was one of the places she cared for the most. However, it was definitely in peril at this moment, and as an illusory avatar, there was nothing that she could do to help. At this point, Magwayan turned to Mark behind her, who immediately noticed her actions. There was no need to ask what she wanted. Mark shrugged and turned to his group, who were already waiting for his instructions. "Spera, open a portal to the Minicube. Ilya, Chemetris, go with Spera and get our stuff into the vessel. Then, bring the vessel here. We will need it." "Okay," Spera replied. "No problem." Ilya also answered while Chemetris replied with a nod. "The rest, we'll go down the mountain while assessing the situation. We don't know the full situation yet. We have to be careful." Mark continued and then turned to Feng Jiruo. "You can fight, right?" That question would have baffled anyone. After all, Feng Jiruo was a Chinese cultivator and a sword practitioner, and she was not injured or anything either. There was no way that she could not fight, and Mark clearly knew that. However, Mark's group immediately understood that he was not questioning her in terms of ability but her mental state. Ever since she exited the trial of regrets and failed, she was already feeling down. No one within the group asked her why, as what they encountered during the trial was something private. Not to mention that a person's regret could also be their greatest weakness. Although Feng Jiruo was doing her best to show that she was all right, It was not hard to see that she was just pushing herself to do so. "I'm fine," Feng Jiruo replied to Mark. However, she was not looking at him but at the blazing flames swallowing the forest below the mountain. Fortunately, her eyes were firm as she stared at the flames as if something was ignited inside her. Mark watched her, looking at her eyes. Feng Jiruo was not looking at the flames in front of her. Instead, she seemed to be looking at the flames in her memories. However, compared to her expressions in the past few days, her expression right now was far better. "All right, leave the backpacks, and let's move," Mark said as he began taking off his backpack. Everyone aside from Spera, Elia, and Chimetris put down the things they were carrying and began heading down the mountain. Spera immediately opened a portal towards where they left the minicube, outside the secret realm. Mark picked up Miracle in his arms and let out Kaval, the canine feline golem, to let Abigail and Iola ride on its back. With this, they all could increase their speed without anyone lagging behind. Running down the mountain was much faster than climbing up. Coupled with the inhuman speed and strength of the people in Mark's group, they scaled down the mountain faster than one would expect. As they went further down the mountain, the more they realized how dire the situation was. The flames were spreading fast since a third of the mountain was covered in lush forests. It would not take long, and the flames from the northeastern side of the mountain would encircle the entire. The residents of the mountain would have no other choice but to climb further up. In the end, everyone would get trapped in the higher parts of the mountain without anywhere else to flee. As Mark's group rushed down the mountain, they could see many magical races fleeing from the flames. Most of them seemed to be sylphs and smaller fairy-like creatures, who were races unfit for battle. Mark wanted to stop any of them to ask what was going on. However, the sight of Mark's group, which were already known to be demons, caused the creatures to flee from them instead. There was no time to chase those fleeing magical races. Instead, Mark focused on going towards the location where they saw two silhouettes flying in the sky. He was sure that one of those two was actually Silam, the black-dressed Diwata, and the guardian of his secret realm. Boom! A shockwave enveloped the area, making Mark's group stop to brace themselves. From the aura contained within the shockwave, Mark became even more sure that they were heading towards Silam. Fuwu! Crash! Suddenly, a loud air-filled roar entered everyone's ears along with the sounds of trees crashing down. Because of that roar, the thick smoke from the burning forest was disturbed and blown away slightly. It allowed Mark's group to see what caused that roar and saw a gigantic, four-legged creature. It seemed to be a tortoise due to its shape, but its shell was filled with holes releasing thick gray smoke. The 5-meter-tall giant's body was also filled with cracks, but due to the high temperatures of its body, the cracks were glowing like burning magma. Mark concentrated and expanded his detection range forwards, and there, he managed to conclude what the enemies were. "Infected," Mark said out loud as he did not detect any sign of consciousness from the gigantic creature in front of them. By the looks of it, the infected managed to reach Mount Madia and found a way to breach the illusory wall of the secret realm. It was not something too surprising. Sonogo managed to break and absorb the seal that Kaptan created after turning into an infected. It meant that the other infected had the possibility of doing the same. Furthermore, the main defense of the secret realm of Mount Madia was its maze-like forest at the foot of the mountain. However, even that forest would not work if the enemy was a giant tortoise that burned everything around it. Worst, the residents of the secret realm had no way to subdue the fire. The magical races in this place were mostly nature, wind, and fire elementals. Thus, the flames reached an uncontrollable degree in no time without anyone to combat it. The wind elementals like sylphs might have been able to stop it, however, they lacked the proper knowledge to do so. Groaaa, eerie roars could be heard alongside the sounds of battle. Mark's group finally reached where the forces of Mount Madia were fighting the horde of infected that breached the barrier. Looking at the horde, Mark's group could not help but feel surprised. There were at least 1,000 infected in front of them, possibly more. Furthermore, all of them were mutated into something like moving charred creatures that could endure the flames without dying. It was clear that each of them had bodies with extremely high temperatures as their bodies released smoke after every step they took. This infected horde mutated using that big guy as their catalyst. Mark surmised the very possible scenario immediately. A single, mutated infected, caused its entire horde to mutate. It was something with low possibility but not impossible to happen. It was even more likely to occur if the mutated infected's mutation could affect the entire horde constantly. Looking at the situation, Magwayan could not help but feel remorse. There was nothing she could do to help at all. As they said, gods were not omnipotent. They could even feel helpless on some occasions. Magwayan was in her own world. There was no way she could affect Earth from where she was right now. Fortunately, Mark intended to help. He was not a person who would forget favors. Although Magwayan was somehow irritating on how she seemed to manipulate and anticipate Mark's actions, she was still the one that guided them here and let them reap benefits. It was unexpected that the chance to repay the favors came too soon. However, this opportunity was a fairly welcomed one as Mark did not want to owe anyone favors for too long. Boom! Once more, a shockwave enveloped the area, blowing away the flames and the smoke rising towards the sky. Silim was definitely in a heated fight with someone or something. It was surprising that something that could contend against Silim, a deity, appeared. Bam! Suddenly, Silim's figure shot nearby Mark's group and crashed to the ground, causing dust and dirt to scatter. Unexpectedly, Silim was the one on the losing side. Ho! What do we have here? A voice speaking in spirit language entered everyone's ears, making them all look at the sky. There, a handsome man floated with an annoying smirk on his face while he stared at Mark's group with eyes filled with interest and surprise. Day 237 to 12:15 p.m. Secret Realm, Mount Madia as Panay Mountain Range, Province of Aklan. The flames blazed, spreading fast across the forest. Growls and gargled moans entered everyone's ears as the infected marched, invading the magical land they found. Sounds of battle echoed as the inhabitants of the secret realm tried their best to fend their land against the infected. All these things happened in the background as Mark's group raised their heads and stared at the enemy before them. Hovering in the air, it was a handsome man that could make anyone envious. He had hair that reached a little below his shoulder while wearing a tribal cloth bandana on his forehead. His top was half naked with only some sort of animal leather draped on his body. It showed his finely chiseled body and pale white skin tone. The right part of the man's face, right arm, and torso had a large tribal tattoo covering it. Below, he was wearing what seemed to be a tribal loincloth adorned with fangs and bones of predatory animals on his belt. The strange, handsome man held a spear made of bone, with a spiky tip made of crystal. With the presence of Mark's group, the enemy sure was curious. He was looking at the group in arrogance while also seemingly angry. I was denied entry to this place while demons and humans were allowed inside. Talk about double standards. The man realized what composed Mark's group and complained in anger while staring at Silim, who now stood up from her fall. Silim's fall was not a soft one. The ground around her was heavily dented, even causing cracks in the large rocks of the mountain. Being a powerful person, Silim was not harmed. However, she was clearly weakened after the encounter. It is not about race, Silim argued, not reverting her attention away from the handsome man. There is no way I will let an incarnation of evil like you into our home. The reply from Silim made the handsome man tilt his head. Demons who are not evil, you say? The handsome man scanned Mark's group. Well, those freaks do exist. Demons were evil creatures. It was not only humans who shared such ideals. Though, in truth, demons were just like any other race. There were good and evil amidst their ranks. However, as demons were evil in general, with most being the manifestation of distorted emotions and desires, good ones were considered freaks among the demon race. As the handsome man panned his eyes on the group of demons before him, his eyes caught the sight of a woman wearing a veil to cover her face. Somehow, he became curious about the demon woman. "You, take off your veil," the handsome man said to the demon woman in a commanding tone. That command did not only make Mark's group frown but also made Silam stare at the inconceivable attitude of that man. They were in the middle of battle, yet he had the audacity to focus his attention on something else. Silam was not defeated yet. Even so, the man seemed to think that he had won already. He also behaved as if the group of demons was beneath him. "I did not think to see such audacity." The handsome man was interrupted by a woman's voice. It was only then he realized the figure of a black-dressed woman that appeared beside Silam. Surely, the man was surprised that he never noticed the woman at all. "Mother," Silam greeted as she regained her footing. Magwayan did not reply, however. Her attention was fully on the intruder. Still, hearing Silam call the woman as her mother made the man extremely shocked beyond disbelief. "How? All gods should have disappeared from this world already. Why is someone like you still here?" It seemed that the man was aware that Silam was Magwayan's daughter in the first place. At first, the man thought that he did not detect Magwayan because she was a god and the difference in their strength. But immediately, he noticed. Magwayan was not exuding the godly aura that she was supposed to have as a god. "No, you're not the real body. Damn, that scared me." The man surely feared that Magwayan was still here, but a simple projection that Magwayan had in this place would not be able to do anything. Even so, this man behaved differently from most. He did not pay respect to a god in front of him. It was even though he was the same as Silam, a spirit of nature. The handsome man was not an infected, nor a demon. Dewatas had another term they were called with among the residents of this country. Spirit races such as elementals and even some demons were locally called Encantos. From there, the highest among the Encantos were the Dewatas, which also referred to as Encantadas. And although not have a different name, the male counterpart of the Encantadas, the Encantados, they were the rare kind of spirits of nature, as the more powerful spirits were mostly born as females. However, different from the Dewatas, good alignment, the Encantados were known as vile beings. They were known to trick humans using various methods, and worse, killing the victims in the process. Encantados always had fun at the cost of others' torment. It made it even questionable if they were demons in disguise, but their origins were far different from demons as they were born in a similar way to Dewatas. And that was while they both came from the same origins, being spirits of nature. Dewatas and Encantados were known to be mortal enemies. Well, in this case, it was different. Silam was a Dewata, created by Magwayan with Bathala's help. She was not a normal spirit of nature. Even so, Silam shared the same sentiment as others towards Encantados. Encantados were enemies. They were the culmination of nature's hate while the Dewatas were the representation of nature's love. It was what was being portrayed here, as the Encantado, in front of them led a horde of infected into the secret realm to attack it. "Do not think that you already won," Silam said with a slight growl. She intended to continue fighting. "Do not force yourself." The Encantado arrogantly smiled at the Dewata. "I don't know why you're weakened, but you are no match for me in your current state. I rather not kill you since I want you as one of my wives." There, the Encantado's true goal was revealed. He was not only aiming to seize this place as his own. He was also aiming to turn Silam into his wife. Well, as he said, one of his wives. Suddenly, the Encantado turned to the demon woman wearing the veil on her face. "Why not join Silam? Become my wife and I might think of sparing the others." Mark stared at the enemy with a frown. It seemed that the Encantado was drawn unto May's beauty, even though she was already covering her face to avoid attention. "Oh!" Mark called out to the Encantado, "Bold of you to court someone else's wife in front of her husband." The Encantado was arrogant, and Mark spoke with the same arrogant tone. Finally, the Encantado turned to Mark for the first time. Yes, he did not acknowledge Mark's presence at all. Only when Mark said the words that implied that he was the demon woman's husband that the Encantado put Mark in his eyes. So, she already had a husband? The Encantado smirked. You think I would care? A lowly demon as ugly as you would not be able to keep her? You sure? Mark said, not minding being called ugly, and turned to May. Mayor, you tell him. May was surprised, but she was clearly pissed at how the enemy was ridiculing Mark. Although she could barely understand spirit language, she could piece out the words that the enemy spouted. And with her limited vocabulary of the spirit language, May, who was always afraid of men, yelled out. Shut up! You ugly! May yelled with momentary courage before running behind Mark and hiding. Why you? The enemy was stunned, speechless. To be called ugly with his heavenly appearance was a first for him. Silam, on the other hand, became nervous. Watch out! Silam yelled as the figure of the Encantado blurred. The Encantado had an extreme complex for his appearance. Yes, this man was a narcissist, and to an absolute degree. And those that thought otherwise were immediately crushed under his overwhelming strength. Boom! A shockwave enveloped the place, with Mark's group at the center. But outside Silam's expectations, the Encantado was blown back to the sky, shocked and disheveled as he stared at the leader of the group of the demons. Who said that you can touch my wife with your filthy hands? Mark said in irritation. His eyes had both the red and dark violet glow, with his fist in front of him, with veins glowing bright red. As the battle finally started, Mark issued orders. Mayor, Geruo, go with everyone and deal with the infected. Leave this ugly bastard to me. May and Feng Geruo nodded as they brought the little girls and Amihan to run in a different direction. Mark also took out the remaining 2 golems to go with the group. Why? The Encantado shivered as he floated in the sky. He did not care whether the rest of the demons were running away. His attention was on his handsome face as he frantically felt it with his hands. He immediately felt something wet as he touched his nose. It was a drop of red blood with a sheen of gold. The Encantado was extremely furious. His eyes were now focused on Mark in extreme rage. It was because out of all places, Mark, without hesitation, punched the Encantado's face when he defended from the latter's attack. The handsome face that a narcissist valued the most. Even Silam was reluctant to do that as it would throw the Encantado berserk. But Mark did not care for that. Before the Encantado could react, Mark opened his wings and began to transform. The transformation of a pure blood demon. It was the first time Mark did this after the fusion of dimensions. Of course, it was the first time for Magwayan to witness it either. Mark's black hair grew longer, having the reddish tint and sheen. His fangs grew, and the nails on his hands turned to claws. The veins on his entire body glowed red as a powerful aura exuded from his body unto the surroundings. But then, Mark noticed some differences that he had never seen before. Mark had 3 pairs of wings, with the third and lowest pair being smoke-like and ethereal. But now, the ethereal wings materialize. Not only that, but his wings grew larger, with each having the span of almost a meter. Furthermore, and the most noticeable thing, the markings on his body had actually turned golden. And it was exuding an aura both familiar and unfamiliar to Mark. But Magwayan immediately noticed that aura. It was the aura of the protection that those that passed the trial of regrets acquired. But when Mark transformed, the aura became concentrated on the markings on Mark's body, turning the black markings gold. At Mark's transformation, the enemy sure was taken aback. The person he thought to be a lowly demon was actually a pure blood, not to mention the possibility of being a monarch among his race. Even so, the Encantado was not feeling fear. In his mind, he was still superior to Mark, being someone at the level of Silam, who was a deity. Putting the unexpected changes aside, Mark concentrated his attention on the enemy. This guy was strong. Although Mark managed to counterattack just now, it was due to the enemy underestimating him and his group. Now, even though the enemy was still looking arrogant, he already had his guard up. If Mark did not transform and unleash all his strength, he would not be an opponent to this Encantado at all. After all, with the exception of the Great One and Sonogo, this Encantado was the strongest enemy he had met so far. Day 237 to 12:19 p.m. Secret Realm, Mount Madia as Panay Mountain Range, Province of Aklan. Mark's sudden transformation, revealing that he was a pure blood demon, sure made the Encantado taken aback. However, the surprise was momentary. The pain on the Encantado's face after Mark punched him caused him to become enraged immediately. Without waiting for Mark to take the initiative, the Encantado swooped down with his spear in front. In the first place, he was clearly a seasoned warrior. A warrior knew that the person who would make the preemptive attack would have the slight advantage it gave. Even in his enraged state, the Encantado made the preemptive attack as if it was ingrained into his existence. It was an attack without holding back. Anyone in front of the Encantado's crystal spear would feel the pressure and fear of death as it approached them at an almost impossible to follow speed. Only those in front would be able to see the spear as it closed into their eyes. The Encantado's figure in the sky blurred, and almost in an instant. Boom! Rumble! Rocks, dirt, and dust scattered with a loud boom, and the ground shook with an audible rumble. Swoosh! Suddenly, the cloud of dirt and dust was blown away as the crystal spear swooshed through it, shooting towards the sky. Mark, who evaded the preemptive attack unharmed and appeared in the sky, swayed his body to the left. The crystal spear passed by in front of his chest. However, its target was not Mark's heart as one would expect. Instead, it aimed for Mark's right arm and second right wing. Since Mark could see the crystal spear fly towards him, one way to negate the attack was to catch the spear. However, Mark decided not to, considering the strength that the spear was thrown. If he did try to catch the spear, he would end up getting pulled by it. Worse, his arm would have been severely injured. Or maybe, the worst, his arm getting torn off. Thus, Mark could only evade. That was how strong the opponent was in just what seemed to be a simple throw of his spear. Although he evaded the spear entirely, Mark could feel the strong wind pressure following behind it. He was blown back a little and had to stabilize his flight. However, it was not the end. Swoosh! The sharp sound of whistling air entered Mark's ears, making him turn his neck over his right shoulder and suddenly evade to his right. The spear that he evaded just now turned around and tried to skewer his left shoulder from behind. As the crystal spear missed its target once more, it returned to its owner. Its return caused the remaining dust and dirt that clouded the area to be blown away. The dissipation of the cloud of dust and dirt revealed a gigantic crater where Mark stood before. It was as if a large chunk of the mountain's face was broken off. The crater was wide and deep enough to bury an Apache helicopter entirely. At the center of the crater, the Encantado stood with the spear in his right hand. He was staring at Mark, both enraged and excited. That's right. Struggle. Do not die easily. The Encantado voiced out. It was clear that he did not intend to kill Mark in one go. His attacks might have power, but he was clearly avoiding targeting Mark's vitals. The Encantado wanted to toy with his enemy, wanting Mark to suffer before killing him. Mark knew the Encantado's intentions as the enemy's emotions flowed into him. However, Mark did not show any reaction to this. Instead, he thought that it was a good thing. The Encantado was clearly underestimating Mark. Because of this, it would become easier for Mark to pull a surprise attack under the enemy's nose. At this time, while Mark was still trying to read the Encantado's next move, he spoke. It was not to the enemy, however. Don't bother trying to help. You'll just get in the way since I don't know how you fight. Go and try helping your people instead. Those words were clearly for Silam, who was about to join the fight after recovering from her fall. Mark's words resonated into Silam's ears while also infuriating the Encantado even more in the process. Creating another tremor, the Encantado kicked the ground. It dented the already deep crater as he launched himself towards Mark. Once more, the Encantado charged at Mark with his crystal spear. Boom! Mark avoided the spear, and with a counterclockwise spin, Mark did a roundhouse kick the Encantado, aiming for the enemy's neck. Unfortunately, the Encantado blocked the kick using the shaft of the crystal spear. I caused Mark's right foot to turn a bit numb as his right forefoot hit the metal-like spear shaft. The clash, however, separated the two more than a dozen meters apart in the air. At this moment, Silam turned her head to the burning forest below. She was not sure if Mark would need her help or not, but her people clearly needed her. Then, as she was about to heed Mark's words and fly down the mountain, she noticed something fall in front of her. The black-dressed Diwata immediately caught it. It was the mark of the king. It would allow Magwayan to accompany Silam below since the avatar of the goddess could only exist around the artifact. Magwayan would not be of help to Mark. Instead, her presence would bolster the morale of the denizens of this realm. One last time, Silam looked at Mark in gratitude. Then, she and Magwayan flew down the mountain together. Mark had no time to watch the two. The Encantado was already on another attack. Swoosh! Swoosh! The crystal spear pierced and flailed. Only after images of the spear could be seen as it moved at an extremely fast speed. It was amazing that Mark was actually avoiding each attack at a hair's breadth. Seeing that his attacks were being evaded with minimal effort, the Encantado was getting increasingly furious. His rage was growing exponentially. His intention to play with Mark before killing him became washed away as frustration began to take over. The Encantado unleashed dozens of attacks on Mark with his crystal spear in the span of a few seconds. That was how fast his movements were. Not to mention that each pierce, flail, and strike were strong, causing shockwaves behind it. Nonetheless, Mark evaded each attack. His left eye glowed bright purple, while his right eye glowed bright red. Each eye left a trail of light in each move he made. Mark had a disadvantage in terms of strength and speed against the Encantado. Furthermore, Mark was relying on his wings to fly and move in the air. On the other hand, the enemy was floating using his magic. The enemy had more stability in this aerial fight. Even so, Mark could still evade the attacks. It was due to his left eye, allowing him to see seconds into the future. Mark already saw the attack even before the Encantado moved his spear. Furthermore, Mark had his usual strategy. His right eye glowed brighter as he implanted more and more negative emotions into the mind of his opponent. As the opponent's mind was flooded by these emotions, their reasoning would weaken, and their ability to think become increasingly clouded. And worse, the opponent had no way of knowing that his mind was slowly being corroded by Mark. Furthermore, he was careful not to mix in unnecessary emotions as it could alert stronger opponents such as this Encantado in front of him, making it even harder to realize. The fight went on with Mark doing nothing but evading. He was analyzing the enemy in front of him, but for some reason, he found something odd. The Encantado clearly was familiar with using the spear, and each of his attacks, despite his enraged state, was sharp and was a killing blow. But as a magical creature, it was strange that the Encantado was not using any magic attacks, unlike the other magical creatures he fought before. Mark could feel that the Encantado was using his magical energy. However, it was all concentrated within his flight and the attacks of his crystal spear. It was kind of a bummer for Mark. One way that Mark could weaken an opponent was to use miasma to absorb their magical attacks. He did it back them in Katandwanas against that Lord of Demons there. Yet, it would be useless if the opponent was not using magic as an attack. Worst, the hoarder within Mark did not want to use miasma directly against this Encantado. It would make the fight end easily for sure. However, if the Encantado's body got corrupted by miasma, Mark would not be able to get a new crystal from this guy at all. Miasma would corrupt the Encantado's body entirely as his body was made of similar to an elemental. It was a body made of magical energy. And since the creation of a crystal by the Psi crystal, needed magical energy, it would become impossible to get one from this powerful being. One may call it greedy, and well, it was true. But Mark also did not want to be wasteful, especially now that any resource could mean life and death to anyone. Boom. Bam. As Mark dodged another stab of the crystal spear and it passed over his shoulder, the tip of the spear exploded with magical energy. Mark would not be killed by this, but he was immediately sent falling towards the burning forest below. Mark had his cards up his sleeves, but the Encantado was the same. It seemed that the crystal spear was not only controllable by the Encantado, but could also channel his magical energy at will. Getting his first hit, the Encantado smiled manically. His eyes followed the trajectory that Mark was thrown to. There, Mark's fall caused quite an amount of damage to the surroundings. It was not just some explosion after all. It was an explosion created by a deity-like being. Mark's fall caused damage not only to the already burning forest. There were magical creatures and mutated infected that were pushed back by the shockwave caused by Mark's fall. But then, the Encantado frowned. Mark vanished from his sight and he could not detect his magical energy. No, in the first place, the Encantado could not detect any magical energy from Mark since the start. The only thing he felt was the aura that distinguished him and most of his group as demons. The Encantado flew over the burning forest, frantically searching for his opponent. However, the only things he saw were the mutated infected and the magical races locked up in a fight for survival. Some even tried to attack him, only to get exploded to pieces after he shot them with his crystal spear. In the middle of the flames, Mark sat down on the ground. His clothes were tattered, and he was almost naked. His body was also riddled with wounds and burns. The explosion that sent him falling could not be joked at. If he was any weaker, he could have died. Sitting down on the ground, Mark was thinking of a way to fight the enemy with minimal effort. He did not want to use up the energy of his crystals since the fight with Sonogo was drawing near. As Sonogo had Copton's godly energy, it was better to be prepared for the worse and unexpected circumstances. Mark looked up at the sky. His body was healing rapidly to the point that Mark was also surprised. By the looks of it, his regeneration became stronger while he was not aware. At the same time, the golden glow of the markings on his body also seemed to be helping him heal faster. From where Mark sat, he could see the rampaging Encantado, both the magical races and the mutated infected, deemed him as an enemy. Both forces were attacking him, only to get brutally murdered. Seeing that it would not be a good thing for this to continue, Mark stood up. Crimson, Mark called out as the black-colored Bloodchild appeared out of thin air. Armorize. The command made Crimson change his shape, stretching and covering Mark's recovering body before turning into a sinister armor. Mark stared at the rampaging Encantado. Raising both his hands to the side, black flames enveloped his arms. With Mark at the center, a vortex of black flames was created. Furthermore, the flames that covered the forest around Mark began to turn black, spreading at a rapid rate. "Let's get a bit serious," Mark said, finally deciding to put effort into defeating the enemy. Day 237 to 12:22 p.m. Secret Realm, Mount Madia as Panay Mountain Range, Province of Aklan. On the other side of the battlefield, the magical races residing in this secret realm were having a difficult time. Swoosh. Swoosh. Arrows rained as the winged centaur, like horse-headed beings, the Bentuhangans, flew around the smoke-covered sky and shot their bows. Boom. Balls of fire stormed the already burning forest as the 3-foot-tall, flame-haired women, the Burlakas, shot their magic to their enemies. The other magical creatures did their best to fend against the invading, infected. Unfortunately, while being called magical or paranormal creatures, not all of these creatures were versed in manipulating magical energy. Many still had to resort to weapons. Unfortunately, these weapons were far more primitive than what modern humans had. Of course, the infected were doing what they were well known about. It was to use their hordes' overwhelming numbers to swarm their victims. Then, turned their victims into one of their own. The situation was dire for the residents of this realm. The population of the inhabitants of this realm was small, only numbered around 1,000 in the entire mountain. It was everyone, including the humans that currently resided in it. Worse, the ones actually capable of fighting did not even reach half of the number, and not everyone was present since the only area affected by the event was the northeastern side of the mountain. The mountain was big. Most villages of the magical races were scattered about in the entire mountain. There was no way that all of them would be able to gather in one place in a short amount of time. And the worst thing, the infected managed to kill many already, turning them all into infected, capable of using their magical skills and fighting prowess when they were still alive. This situation caused more deaths among the camp of the defenders, causing the number of the infected ones to increase further, which was stronger and had more dangerous abilities than the initial intruders, who were all mutated infected humans and animals. The worst about this horde, they were hard to fight in a prolonged amount of time. Since the mutated infected's bodies were hot, the temperature around the horde was far above the tolerable degree. Being outnumbered, having their own people turned against them, and with the extreme temperatures, the residents of the realm were being pushed back. There was no need to mention that because all of the infected within the initial horde were all mutated, having bodies with high temperatures and burnt crust like armor, the attacks, especially the fireballs, barely had any effect. Furthermore, the forest fire was quickly spreading. The residents of the realm could barely defend themselves. There was no way for them to subdue the flames and control the fire's spread. Their line of defense easily crumbled, and the residents could only slowly retreat up the mountain while defending their lives. But then, while the army of Mount Madia was slowly retreating the line of defense, a beam of light tore through the front line of the marching horde of infected. The magical races looked at the sky, seeing the familiar female demon, who now displayed her 2 pairs of rainbow-colored wings. Since most fighters here were present during the time that the passage to Kahilwayan was opened, they knew the familiar-looking demon. Surely, the magical races hated demons. However, this time, the warriors in the front line could not help but feel amazed and rejoiced once they saw the front line of the threatening invaders turn to nothingness in one go. Furthermore, it was not only the female demon in the sky. On the ground, several others also reached the battlefield. Right now, the enemies were not the demons nor the humans. It was the infected, who were the threat to everyone. May and the others arrived. From the sky, May swooped down and transformed her weapon, the shooting moonblade, from a sniper rifle into a large sword. Unfortunately, although she could shoot those powerful beams more than before, they still have a limited number of empty, mental crystals, not to mention the crystal converters that were hard to make. And since Mark was not present here, she needed to lead the group up front. Every infected present were either mutated or those with magical powers. There was no way she would let her daughters fight on the ground all on their own. May reached the ground in front of the enemies at great speeds. She could feel the sudden change in temperature, but she did not care that much as she glided towards the infected, gliding with her sword at her side. The blade decapitated several infected before she came to a stop. Unfortunately, the bodies of the mutated infected were hard and her speed decreased severely after each kill. Even so, landing on the ground was May's initial intention. She held her large sword with both hands as she began to clear the area of the burnt, mutated infected. It was all to set up their battlefield, where their group would face the enemies. Being the fastest, Abigail arrived riding on her rabbit golem, Anaba. The rabbit golem, designed to have strong jumping legs, jumped over and around obstacles without any effort. The moment the two arrived near May, Abigail jumped off the rabbit golem's back. It was a dangerous stunt for an ordinary girl as they were moving too fast. But Abigail was far from an ordinary 8-year-old. She landed on the ground without any sound or impact like the agile cat that she was. And as soon as she landed, she immediately took off to kick the nearest infected's head, causing its neck to break. Pieces of its burnt skin armor around its neck fell to the ground as its head was flung away somewhere deep within the horde. Anaba joined the fight with its master. Together with Abigail, the two jumped around the battlefield, making heads fly and necks snapped everywhere. Soon, Emihan arrived, riding the wind she conjured. She immediately felt the hot temperature exuded by the infected and the burning surroundings. As such, her first move was to use her magic to blow cold air into the surroundings. Since the wind's temperature control was not her forte, it was not cold enough to counter the heat. However, it was more than enough to reduce the temperature to make everyone last longer in the battle. Not only the temperature but the wind Emihan conjured cleared the area of smoke and steam. It became easier for everyone to fight, not only their group but also the warriors of this realm. The next to arrive were Iola and Miracle, riding on the feline canine golem, Kaval. Behind the three were the maid golem, Brynhilder. They were just in time as, flying infected, swooped down on May and the others. Surely, they would be able to avoid it. However, there was no need to with Iola present. With a wave of her hand, Iola conjured a barely visible barrier facing the incoming, flying infected. The unknowing, flying infected, slammed onto the barrier and immediately started to burn. Since some of them were newly turned ones, the barrier burnt them to crisp. However, the already mutated infected, having burnt bodies with already high temperatures, were still alive. The flying infected, that survived Iola's burning barrier, fell to the ground. Charging towards Iola's barrier at high speeds was not something advisable, infected or not. Of course, the infected that fell were still alive and would recover in any second, but before they could do so, Miracle's small figure together with Kaval appeared to destroy the necks of the infected. The strength of the two was more than enough to crush the burnt skin armor of the mutated infected. Furthermore, as the two were both non-human, the heat could not bother them at all, and they could perform at their best. Finally, the last of the group arrived. It was the Chinese sword cultivator, Feng Jiruo, and the maid golem, Brynhilder. It was not like the two were slow. It was just that the other members of the group moved faster than the two. Without waiting for anything, Brynhilder moved in front of her master, Iola. After all, Iola's power was more for defense than attack, and the girl would need her strength as an intelligent weapon. Transforming her right arm into a sword and left arm into a shield, Brynhilder activated one of her forms on her own, the Assault Defender mode. In this form, her specialty was to intercept and kill any threat that would approach her master. On the other side, Feng Jiruo also joined the fray. In each wave of her sword, a head would fly. One could also see a thin film of energy around her body as she used her inner energy, or ki, to protect her from the harsh temperature. Gurua. All of a sudden, a large, mutated infected, charged through after spotting the group. Like the others, its body was all burnt and crusted, with cracks glowing like lava. However, while seemingly a mutated human, it was about 3 meters tall with its body having the shape of a bloated gourd. It unstably tottered towards the group, knocking and killing any obstacle on its way. Whether it was a burning tree or another, infected, did not matter. The large, infected, charged like a crazy madman towards its target. The first within the large, mutated infected's trajectory was Feng Jiruo. One would fear the charge of this mutated infected, as it could mow down trees and a large number of infected in its path, even crushing some of its allies under its feet. But Feng Jiruo only raised her blade in front of her. Staring straight at the mutated infected, she released a breath of air, taking in another breath in a certain rhythm. Her inner energy circulated within her body fiercely and soared towards the blade of her sword. And then, Feng Jiruo's soaring energy stabilized as if it was not flowing fiercely in the first place. At this point, the large, mutated infected was just a few steps away before grabbing onto her small body. Suddenly, just as the mutated infected's arms stretched out to grab Feng Jiruo, her figure blurred before vanishing. The large, mutated infected froze in its tracks as Feng Jiruo's figure appeared behind it, with her sword stretched at her left side. Noiseless blade, Feng Jiruo muttered. Without any sign of being slashed, the body of the large, mutated infected began to crumble into pieces. Each of its pieces fell to the ground, finally making noises. Multiple slashes without making any noise as it cut its target to pieces. It was a Ki-infused sword technique that Feng Zhiruo could not perform at all in the past. It was named as such because it was a silent killing technique. Nonetheless, it was not a technique that was made not to make any sound at all. Instead, it was a technique that displayed fast, strong, and accurate slashes that were more than enough to avoid making any sound of cutting flesh and bones or even the sound of friction between the blade and the air in the surroundings. After killing the large, mutated infected, Feng Zhiruo faced the other enemies near her, releasing a few more techniques which mowed down quite a number of infected at every slash of her sword. The arrival of Mei and the others and the scene of them mowing down enemy after enemy. It was witnessed by the warriors of this realm. Their morale rose as they began to advance instead of retreating. Furthermore, Amahan's methods were seen by the fleeing sylphs. They finally found something where they could help as they tried to copy her. Of course, their strength was nothing compared to Amihan individually. However, there were many of them. Together, they were able to perform the same technique and managed to aid their warriors in this fight for survival. Soon, Silam arrived. Just her appearance alone rose the fighting spirit of the warriors even more, and with her killing the infected, using her magical energy put the front line into a standstill. Unfortunately, even Silam could not do much to stop the flames from consuming the forest. At most, she could slow its spread as she commanded the unburned trees to bend away from the flames. It was at this time that something crashed in the middle of the burning forest, followed by the Encantado. That was the cause of this mess. Surely, the Encantado was swarmed by attacks of the angry magical creatures and was also targeted by the infected below him. Silam and Mei saw who the one that fell. As they knew that it was Mark, they immediately shifted their attacks to the Encantado, thinking that he was able to overpower Mark. Unfortunately, Silam's magical attacks barely affected the Encantado, and Mei's bullets could not even scratch the enemy's body. As Mei was thinking of shooting another beam using the crystal converter, the unexpected scene occurred. The flames that consumed the forest began to change in color in a certain area. The red-hot flames turned into a hellish tint of black. Those black flames began to spread, swallowing a large area in the middle of the burning forest. This eerie scene was witnessed by everyone, warrior or not. Of course, many of them could not help but feel scared, while the Encantado, flying in the air, was also baffled at the scene. Day 237 to 12:28 p.m. Secret Realm, Mount Madia as Panay Mountain Range, Province of Aklan. Black flames began to rage around Mark as he stared at the enemy in the sky. Currently, the scene in the sky was extremely chaotic. The visibility was very low. There was smoke everywhere, not to mention the heat causing the view to be blurred and hazy. Even with the low visibility, it was not hard to see the situation above from below. It was the complete opposite from above, however. The smoke and flames prevented anyone from above from easily seeing anything below. In the sky, the furious Encantado was looking for Mark. However, he could not focus on searching for Mark. Anything that saw him, after all, attacked him. The magical races saw him as an enemy, while the infected saw him as potential prey. This situation, however, caused more deaths among both forces. There was no way these magical races or infected would be able to take down this enraged Encantado. In any case, the attacks that the Encantado were receiving were more than enough to hinder him from finding his opponent. There was no need to mention that even Mei and Silam started firing their own attacks at the enemy. Everything happened as Mark watched, surrounded by flames, regenerating his wounds. Mark conjured his flames. The black flames that he got after he and Ignis formed a contract. Ignis initially had normal-looking flames it could conjure. But when the contract between the cursed sword and Mark formed, Ignis grew into a demon sword. Mark and Ignis then shared the ability to conjure flames due to the contract. But different compared to ordinary contracts, not only did Ignis evolve to become a stronger magical weapon, but the normal-looking flames became black in color. Even to Ignis, who had knowledge about similar contracts after being a member of Ouroboros. This situation was something unprecedented. Normally, even if the contractor and the magical weapon shared the weapon's ability, it would remain the same. Mark continued to conjure the flames. It began to spread, turning the flames of the burning forest black. What was different from his contract with Ignis? Because there was a unique circumstance that only Mark had. Mark held miasma in his body, something that not just anyone would be able to, since formless demons, also born from miasma, had extremely destructive urges. They could not form contracts with magical weapons either. Thus, Mark was likely the first person, wielding miasma, that was able to have a contract with a magical weapon. However, what was the main property of miasma? What was its greatest and strongest effect on things? Miasma's strongest aspect was corrosion. It was a form of corroded magical energy borne by a congregation of strong negative energies and sentiments. Everything that miasma touches would become corroded, especially living beings and any form of magical energy. Magical energy becoming corroded would turn it into miasma, which would become a part of the original cause of the corrosion. It was how miasma would absorb other magical energy and grow stronger. And Mark, having miasma in his body, caused the mutation of the other magical abilities he acquired. The flames he got from Ignis turned black due to this. It was also the miasma and Mark's pure demon blood that caused Ignis to evolve. It was not only the flames. Mark's lightning turned black because of his miasma, not to mention that although not that noticeable, Mark's empath abilities also got affected by the miasma, boosting the effects to some extent when he was channeling negative emotions to his targets. Unfortunately, since his empath abilities could not be seen in any form, the change went unnoticed. And it was not only the color of the flames and lightning changed because of the miasma. These black-colored abilities that Mark had inherited some properties that miasma. For the first time, Mark put the ability of his flames, the miasmic flames, into use. Corrode, convert, and absorb. Mark's miasmic flames corroded the flames in the surroundings, converting it all into black flames and absorbing the flames into his own. As one would know, a person's magical energy was not infinite. Depending on the usage, it would run out sooner or later. But with Mark turning the non-magical flames into his own magical one, he barely used his magical energy but gained more power at his arsenal. Mark closed his eyes and took a deep breath. An area of flames a few dozens of meters around him had already turned into his own power. Unfortunately, turning these flames into his own and freely manipulating the flames were two different things. In fact, both Mark's miasmic flames and miasmic lightning could not be manipulated freely. Since he got these abilities, he never actually showed that he could directly control them, making them like telekinetic energy balls in anime, flying everywhere the user willed. Mark only used these abilities by either discharging them from his body or shooting them in a straight line. It was the same now. After all, acquiring elemental magic never always meant full control over it, especially since it could not be something that one was born with. Even if Mark converted the flames around him into his own, although he could make it disappear, he could not freely manipulate it on its own. Yes, only on its own. At last, Mark's body healed fully. He also reached the limit of the farthest distance he could convert the flames. It was time to attack. The Psi crystal glowed, and Mark called out the wind manipulation crystal. Strong winds began surging, the black flames swayed violently. The fluctuation of energy from the wind manipulation crystal alerted the Encantado of Mark's position. The smoke was blown away, showing Mark standing with his sinister black armor and a marble-like crystal circling around his right wrist. Seeing Mark, the Encantado caused a surge of energy around him, throwing everyone attacking him away by force before charging at Mark like a maniac. However, it was too late. Whoosh! A vortex of black flames shot from below, forming a thin fire tornado and blocking the Encantado's path towards Mark. The Encantado arrogantly brushed the fire tornado, slashing it off using his crystal spear. But then, ah! The Encantado froze on his spot with a painful yell. Bits and pieces of the flames that he tried to brush off touched his supposedly undamageable skin. The small black flames latched onto his skin, causing him extreme pain. As one would immediately do, the Encantado tried to put off the black flames on his body, which he managed to do. Nonetheless, patches of his skin were already burnt in the extremely short time that the black flames touched his skin. This situation alarmed the Encantado greatly. The Encantado could brush off Silim's strongest attack without defending. Yet, a small bit of black flame caused him so much pain and burnt his skin. And to the Encantado's horror, 1, 2, 3. Numerous vortices formed in the lake of black flames. The Encantado looked at Mark, who also stared back with a smile. Mark opened his wings and prepared a weapon for him to use. This time, as Ignis was not present, he brought out his first pair of whip blades, the slicer and the divider. Boom! A shockwave swayed the black flames as Mark kicked the ground and took flight. The scene in front of him immediately gave the Encantado a grave chill in his spine. It was not only Mark that took flight. At the same time, the vortices of black flames shot towards the sky. Mark slashed forward with both blades as he arrived in front of the Encantado. Both suddenly burst into black flames, causing the Encantado to dodge rather than receive the attack. However, both blades extended forward to the Encantado's shock. At the last moment, he avoided the blades with an awkward maneuver. But then, the vortices of black flames arrived. Numerous thin fire tornadoes soared to the sky, trying to hit the Encantado, one after another. The Encantado, who was looking arrogant before, was now extremely afraid as he frantically avoided all the incoming fire tornadoes attacking him. Not to mention that Mark was also attacking the Encantado, with his whip blades clad in miasmic flames. The battle between Mark and the Encantado had come into a drastic turnaround. Before, it was Mark who was on the defensive, avoiding every attack of the Encantado with his crystal spear. Now, it was Mark who was on the offensive, and the Encantado could not even have the slightest time to counterattack. Gah! Of course, no matter how strong a person was, it was rather hard to avoid a formless attack. The fire did not have a concrete form or shape. Without anything putting it into place, it would either scatter or vanish. Worse, an item or even could even cause it to forcefully spread. Several fire tornadoes surged towards the Encantado at the same time. The Encantado evaded the attacks and managed to go unscathed, making the rest of the spiraling flames pass around him. But then, Mark waved his hand, commanding the wind manipulation crystal, flying around his wrist to do something. The spiraling fire tornadoes suddenly spun the opposite way. It caused the black flames following the previous direction of the wind to face resistance and scatter. All of a sudden, the Encantado's eyes widened in shock as he found himself in the middle of black flames scattered everywhere he turned his eyes onto. No matter how fast the Encantado could fly, there was no escaping this attack unless he had some space-bending abilities, which unfortunately he did not. Gahhhhh. A blanket of miasmic flames covered the Encantado, causing him to make a spine-chilling scream as almost his whole body burned horribly. Crackle. But, of course, despite the pain the black flames caused the Encantado, it was not enough to defeat him. That was why. With several loud crackling sounds, streaks of black lightning bolts shot from Mark's swords. Gahhhh. The wails of the Encantado intensified as he was hit numb by the miasmic lightning Mark released. Mark did not expect this kind of reaction from the Encantado. He used these attacks on other enemies before, but he never saw them wail in pain like they were being crushed to pieces. But then, it dawned on Mark. Miasma corrodes magical energy. This property of miasma was channeled unto his flames and lightning, although not as potent as the origin. As a spirit-like being, the Encantado's body was made of magical energy. For every attack that Mark made and hit, the Encantado's body, and worse, existence, were being chipped off painfully. The rage that the Encantado had started dissipating as he finally realized the danger. Flee. That was the only thing the Encantado had in mind due to his current predicament. Boom. A shockwave of magical energy exploded around the Encantado, forcing the flames, lightning, and Mark away. Here, the Encantado's body was now seen, riddled with burns, severe enough to be deadly to humans. His handsome face was also destroyed, but he could not care anymore. His life was now in jeopardy. The Encantado turned around without looking at Mark. Gritting his teeth to endure the pain, he tried to fly away. Mark knew what the Encantado had in mind as he could sense his fear after he experienced Mark's unique abilities. There was no way that Mark would let this guy flee. Swoosh! Turning into a surge of black mist, Mark overtook the Encantado and intercepted his path with slashes from both his whip blades. Mark's sudden appearance in front of him took the Encantado by surprise. Even so, he tried to defend, moving his crystal spear to block the two whip blades. The Encantado did not realize another crystal already appeared, floating around Mark's right wrist. Bang! A burst of light exploded from the crystal, immediately blinding the Encantado, since he was facing Mark. The next thing that the Encantado felt was the unbelievable pain in his waist. He could not feel his lower body anymore. After receiving Mark's attack, the Encantado began to fall. The temporary blindness faded. The Encantado saw his lower body falling separately from him. Slowly, his eyes began to blur. Ha 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 ha. He realized what was happening and began to laugh hysterically. The Encantado could not believe it. He was dying. After thousands of years living in the secular, spirit dimension, he was finally dying. You won. Ha 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 ha. The Encantado yelled maniacally. But don't think I will go down and just accept my fate. At those words, Mark began to shiver. A huge amount of magical energy was gathering at a rapid rate. At the center of it was the dying Encantado. Well, **T. Mark cursed, immediately leaving the location and rushing towards the front lines of the battle. The moment Mark arrived, "Everyone, get down!" Mark roared as he waved his hand, releasing a huge amount of miasma from his body and creating a wall in front of everyone. Boom! All of a sudden, everything was enveloped in a surge of blinding light as the whole mountain shook from a gigantic explosion. Day 237 to 12:32 p.m. Secret Realm, Mount Madia as Panay Mountain Range, Province of Aklan, Island of Panay. Rumble. With the booming sound of explosion and rumbling sound of the ground, the entire secret realm of Mount Madia as shook violently. As someone with the strength of a deity, the amount of energy that the Encantado unleashed as he self-destructed was massive. Mark immediately flew towards the front line, specifically in front of his group, and unleashed his miasma. The black wall of corrupted energy stood in front of everyone, protecting everyone from the brunt of the suicidal attack. Silam and the other residents of this realm also did their best to fend against the surging energy. The Encantado might not have relied on magical attacks due to his nature as a spear-wielding warrior. However, the energy he released upon death was not any less than what Silam had in her peak condition. And this power, it was more than enough to topple a considerably large mountain flat. Thus, even with the actions everyone did to try and fend against the Encantado's rampaging energy explosion, everyone started getting blown away because of the shockwave spreading from the explosion. Mark held his hand forward as he stood in front of his group. He began unleashing all the energy from the wind manipulation mental crystal. Right now, only this and his miasma could be used to defend. The wall of miasma could defend them from getting hit by the exploding magical energy directly. However, blocking the shockwave was not something it could do. And that was what Mark used the wind manipulation mental crystal for. He created a barrier of spiraling wind, defending them from the shockwave and the debris it blew their way. Unfortunately, there was no way that Mark would be able to defend everyone. His priority was his family and group members. The others had to defend themselves. The wind blew strongly, accompanied by the rumbling of the entire mountain. Everyone flying in the sky was blown away, crashing on the face of the mountain, toppling trees, and destroying the terrain. The terrain cracked, rocks rolled down from the peak, and a large amount of dirt fell down in a massive landslide. Destruction ensued all over the mountain. Deaths were numerous, even to those that did not participate at all. On the opposite side of the mountain, the village where the half-breeds and humans lived, most houses were built of cliff faces and trees. The entire mountain shaking caused the houses to collapse and the cliffs to crumble, killing a number of people. Large trees fell, unable to endure the intensity of the earthquake. As they said, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. With the intensity of the explosion of the Encantado's energy, it vanished after a short time. Even so, no one could deny the damage it did in the short time it bloomed brightly. The earth's rumbling ceased and the wind calmed down. Everyone hugging the ground stood up one after another. Mark's group was the same. Although Mark cast several layers of protection, they could only sit down and clutch the ground to keep them from falling over. Finally, Mark took down an wall of miasma and the barrier of wind around his group. And there, the scene in front of them was horrifying. An immeasurable crater was left in front of everyone. The crater formed an almost perfect circle as it was created by the explosion of energy alone. Just how large was the crater? One could probably fit more than half of Mount Madia as inside it. That was how horrifying large the crater was. Furthermore, it was only at that size because Mark's wall of miasma stopped the energy from moving in their direction. If Mark's miasma did not absorb the energy that went their way, it would not be surprising if the crater was as large as the entire mountain itself. That was how powerful deities were. At their will, and even at their death, they could cause such an amount of destruction that no regular person could survive. Mark walked forward, standing at the edge of the crater where the wall of miasma was before. From here, what lay in front of him was nothing but a deep pit of death. It was good that the miasma absorbed the energy coming their way, or else the wall would only be able to protect the surface and still destroyed everything below them. If that happened, despite the wall of miasma and barrier or wind, many would still end up falling to their deaths. As Mark absorbed the miasma back into his body, Mark could not help but feel stronger than before. This result was something he did not expect, but a well-welcomed one. Still, it was not what Mark wanted initially. Mark stared at the deep crater and sighed. The damn Encantado self-destructed. Because of this, it was impossible for Mark to get any crystal from that guy now. Maybe, Mark could have used the Psi crystal to absorb some of the energy unleashed by the Encantado's self-destruction. However, everything happened so fast that there was no time to think about things other than the safety of his family and group members. And even if Mark managed to absorb energy into the Psi crystal, without the guy's body, he would only get an empty mental crystal, or at best, an element-attributed crystal. Mark went all the trouble not to use miasma on the guy but still ended up with nothing. "Gerger, you okay?" May asked Mark, approaching him with the little girls. "I'm okay," Mark replied and looked at his family. "How is everyone?" Gail fell because of the tremors and got her knee bruised, but everything else is fine. Mark bent down and looked at Abigail standing beside May. The little cat girl's right knee had a little bit of skin scraped. "Does it hurt?" Mark asked. "No," Abigail replied with a shake of her head. "Gail is a strong girl, after all." Mark smiled and patted her head, which caused Miracle to grab the hem of Mark's torn pants to get attention. With a bitter shrug, Mark also patted the younger sister's head. Well, both Abigail and Miracle were closest to Mark. It was not surprising to have some rivalry between the two for Mark's attention. But seriously, Mark would have to give them some lectures regarding this afterward. At this time, Silam approached Mark's group with Magwayan floating beside her. Mark could not help but notice something odd. Silam seemed to be even more cautious towards him. Asking for your help did pay off. Magwayan was the first to speak, while Silam just stared at Mark silently. I'm just returning the favor, Mark replied. Anyways, it's not over yet. As Mark said, the battle had not ended. Caused by the shockwave, the fire spread further. Some of the uprooted trees were already burning in the first place. Some burning matter was carried away by the wind and fell on areas where the fire had yet to reach and ignited. Not to mention the infected. The explosion swallowed a good chunk of the horde, probably the majority of them. However, there was still a large number that remained. Some of them even got flung far away from the battlefield and would definitely cause problems soon. At this time, a black hole appeared in the sky, causing some outburst from the surviving magical creatures. And there, the large cube-shaped floating vessel entered the secret realm. It's our ride, Mark told Silam, as she was already on guard. Those words from Mark made Silam look at Magwayan, only to receive an acknowledging nod. This made Silam lower her guard down a bit. She was still cautious of Mark, however. No, it was not just Silam. In fact, all the magical creatures nearby that survived were looking at Mark with heightened alert. Mark already noticed the fact. He just decided not to ask any questions for now. The mini-cube floated down after finding Mark and the rest of the group. After it landed, the three that returned, Spera, Shemetris, and Ilya, jumped out. What the hell happened here? Ilya asked, looking at the horrifyingly large crater. What caused you guys to arrive late? Mark asked the three. After all, the battle was already halfway or more over already. Yet, the three just arrived. We're not missing for that long, you know, Spera replied. Besides, we had to clear a bit of infected lurking around the mini-cube, since there was quite a number gathered when we arrived there. It was not a surprising thing. In the first place, the mini-cube was a vessel that ran on high amounts of magical energy. This would draw the nearby infected onto the vessel when left alone. By what it looked like, there must be quite a number that gathered since they had to take care of the infected first before living. And then, I can't open a portal back in until now. There's some distortion preventing me from connecting the two places. Spera added. The excuse Spera made was plausible. Mark and the Encantado were in a heated battle until just now. Since they were strong beings, their use of their magical energies might have some strong effects on the surroundings, preventing Spera from being able to connect a portal. It also happened before Despera, when Mark fought Garvlam in Bay City. Is there anything left for us to do? Shemetris asked, knowing that some kind of battle had already ended after looking at the aftermath. The infected got scattered all over the mountain. We have to kill them all. Mark grumbled a bit, knowing how much of work it would be, searching for the infected humans and magical creatures that got blown away because of the explosion. But first, we should deal with the fire, Mark said, looking at the flames that continued to rage and swallow the remaining forest. Do you have an idea? Silam finally broke her silence and asked. Right now, the fire was the most troublesome for them. If left alone, the whole mountain would turn into a burnt barrel land in no time. I have one. Mark nodded. That's if you don't mind getting wet. Probably, gather the burlacause away from the flames too. Getting wet is not an issue, Silam said. I will communicate with my people and tell the burlacause to hide. What will you do? I'll make it rain a bit, Mark replied, making Silam a bit surprised. Making rain was not as easy as it was said. Controlling weather was not something that anyone could pull off without a unique power, after all. And it was Mark who said it, after already showing several monstrous abilities in his arsenal. Even so, Silam did not question it. Instead, she began communicating with her people using her mind. Surely, many magical creatures died and more were injured, but after receiving their deity's message, they immediately went to work. A few minutes passed. Shemetris had already gone off to eliminate the infected, As for the rest, they stayed in one place to rest. The battle earlier might be short, but it literally felt like it took a good chunk of their lifespan. After all, they were all just in the face of death after that Encantado exploded, and Mark was the only one who separated them from that fate. The flames still raged and began spreading even more, but this time, everyone seemed calmer. Soon, Silim gave her go. All Burlakas had already evacuated. As beings of fire, these little girls with fiery hair were not too friendly with water. Rain was one of their adversaries. And here, Mark took out the crystal with a deep blue glowing orb inside it. Mark raised his right hand towards the sky, causing the crystal floating in front of his palm to glow brightly. The energy was released from the crystal, causing great surprise to Silim and Magwayan. The power of the Eastern Sea King. Silim voiced out, recognizing the power flowing out of the crystal. The Eastern Sea King. The title of the king of people in the eastern seas of the Philippines. This revelation made Silim view Mark in an even more cautious manner. After all, not only did Mark had shown the ability to control miasma, the most feared power by the magical creatures, but also showed that he had a crystal that contained the power of the Eastern Sea King. Why was Mark in possession of such powers? Right now, although Mark showed no ill will towards them, they could not help but see him as a threat. And Silim felt ashamed of it, considering they were receiving help from him at this moment. These emotions sprouted as the dark clouds in the sky converged and rain began to fall onto the mountain's burning and devastated landscape.